Do you think that the painter's biggest mistake was attacking the USSR? If the painter didn't attack the USSR, then the Axis may have won. So, and if so, what would the world have looked like as a consequence of such a decision, and what would have been the impact on India? So the painter obviously refers to the Austrian painter, which is Adolf Hitler, who wanted to be a painter, and yeah, that's a whole different story from a certain period of his life. Was his biggest mistake attacking the USSR? Probably Operation Barbarossa. So the Soviets and the Nazis, the two governments had this non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, right? That we will not attack each other, and we will. The two nations had an understanding of how various subjugated nations their territories would be divided up, and so on. So there was this non-aggression pact between the USSR and Nazi Germany, and if let's say Hitler had not attacked the USSR, started Operation Barbarossa, then maybe he would have been able to focus on England, on Britain, and maybe he would have been able to conquer Britain. That's a possibility. And maybe he would have had more success in North Africa and whatever else he was doing through Rommel and his campaign, the Desert Foxes campaign in North Africa and so on. And obviously that would, and if he had not attacked the USSR, then the whole might of the USSR eventually would not have been unleashed on Nazi Germany, because 80% of the winning in Second World War was done by the Soviets, not by the Americans. The Americans entered the war at a much later period in the war. Okay? So it was the Soviets who did the fighting, the dying, and the winning. And the Americans now, because of Hollywood, they portray themselves as the greatest victors of the Second World War. And the consequence, the new world order that came as a consequence, it saw the ascendancy of the USA, and it became the most powerful nation, sure. But the Second World War was won by the Soviets, 80% of it, not in the European theater, in the Western theater, not by the Americans. So if the painter had decided not to attack the USSR, what could have happened? Then you would probably have had a situation where the painter would have conquered Britain, and maybe if that would have happened, he would have also captured much of North Africa, that Desert Fox campaign that was going on. Maybe he would have taken Suez and taken the Suez Canal in that case, if the non-aggression pact had held, right? And then what would have been the situation like? It would have been a situation like what you have in Europe today. You have Western Europe, which is dominated by NATO, and you have the Eastern European countries that are part of the Soviet bloc. I mean, today many of the Eastern European countries are also part of NATO. So essentially, it's the Russians standing alone against everyone in Europe, apart from a couple of countries like Belarus and so on. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, these are part of essentially the NATO bloc or EU bloc, and all the former Soviet satellite states are, you could say, now allies or vassals of the Americans. So if Hitler had not attacked the USSR, maybe that sort of situation would have happened, that you would have a bunch of nations that are under Soviet domination, and the rest of Europe would have been under Nazi occupation. That's what would have happened. And if the painter would have conquered the UK, then India would have been liberated, right? Then the connection between the British occupiers in India and their overlords in the UK would have been severed. It would have been cut off, and all the supplies and whatnot, and the leadership and whatever else was provided from the UK would not have happened. So that would have probably led to the overthrow, and all the puppets of the British Raj, the various politicians to whom power was eventually handed over in 1947, they would have lost power, because their power came from the overlordship of the British. I'll not take any names because that would be controversial. So India would have been liberated then. And the politicians who came to power in 47, 50, wherever, they would probably not have come to power. It would have been a clean liberation of India, and maybe India would have reverted to a civilizational status, which it currently doesn't have. So it would have been a major change. It would have had a major impact on India, a very positive impact on India, actually. Yeah, that's how the world works, you see. Cause and effect.